I was on the path to become a sniper from about 12. And that's genuine. We were either going to do it and live, not do it and get rescued, or die in the process. I was Aldo Kane, Royal Marine Commando sniper, best in the world.
Yes,
That's the program.
whatever this is, yes.
Whatever
all of
this
that.
is. This is the Big Jim Show.
I'm Jim Hamilton, and on this episode of The Big Jim Show, I'm joined by former Royal Marine Commando, world record holding adventurer and proud Scot, Aldo Kane. This is a conversation about fear, purpose, and the mindset it takes, not just to survive life, but to truly thrive. Aldo is the definition of what it means to be a modern day warrior. I love this conversation, and I hope you do too. Take me back then, how a young boy, one of five children, lives on the west coast of Scotland, ends up joining the Royal Marines at the age of 16. You think, my lad's 14, 16 years old, you're a kid. But just talk us through that journey of becoming a Royal Marine Commando.
So basically, grew up on the west coast of Scotland, not academic. And, you know, looking back on that now, I can see that I was just a normal boy, nothing special at all, apart from I realised early on that whatever I wanted to do and achieve in life, it was basically down to me. You know, I grew up, my family were amazing. You know, mum and dad still alive, still together. There was five of us. My sister passed away last year. So, you know, we've been quite a close family, but we were brought up in the outdoors. So we spent a lot of time like scouts, cadets, that sort of thing. All the stuff that people are like, that's geeky, right? When I
was in the cadets, 2282, air cadets, and I was in the army cadets as well.
There we go.
I was a geek.
Yeah. So I was in that, and I guess I'd sort of realised early on I didn't want to be, you know, flying a desk for the rest of my life. I wanted to be outside doing adventurous stuff. And the Marines, basically it was a choice between the Marines, Army, you know, Navy, Air Force, as you would expect. But there was something about the Marines, and it was a total bullshit lie that someone told me, but it put a rocket up my arse. One of my mates at the time had said that he wasn't going to join the Marines because if your lace comes undone on operations, they leave you behind, right, which is ridiculous. But that to me was like, fuck, what sort of person do you need to be able to get to that level where, you know, your lace doesn't come undone and all your shit's in one sock and you're the most elite fighting soldier on the planet, you know, but not very many. So it was just, you know, it was a boyhood dream, you know, from about 12. And really it was about adventure, it was about travel, it was about having mates, doing cool stuff. At no point did it, I mean, it crossed my mind that you might have to go to war and you train for it all the time, but we were just in a relatively peaceful period of time. I joined in 1994. So there wasn't much going on. So yeah, that was it. I went up with my twin, both passed the PRC, which is the like potential recruits course. We actually signed on at 15 and 9 months, which I think, I'm not sure is either legal or allowed anymore. You can't go anywhere until you're 16. So signed up at 15 and 9 months, did the 10 pull-ups in the careers office, Queen Street. Passed the PRC and then joined up in September 1994. So having gone from being school, I actually dodged out of my exams as well to do some of the training for it. Then went down to Limston and spent the next 6 months, however long it is, going through training there. Which I think for me was, actually my twin and I were supposed to be joining at the same time, and he bailed out like a week before, which devastated me because, you know, we'd shared a room for 16 years. We'd been in the Scouts. We'd been like aiming for the last 3 years to get in the Marines, and he tapped out to stay on and finish school, and that devastated me. So it was the first time really that I had to deal with, I suppose in a way, a bit of rejection from him, my twin brother, who I looked up to, and a bit of fear. You know, I was now on my own. I wasn't Aldo and Ross. It was just Aldo, and so I remember getting on the train that day. I literally couldn't hold the tears back. I was so excited, so scared, and like the entire world in front of me, and I was now I was now going to be a man. So that's kind of how I then got into that. And my thought process when I was in the careers office was like, what's the hardest, longest one? So I'll do that, and if I don't pass there, then I'll go to the next one. So at that point, though, I was still very much like, I knew what I wanted. I knew that it wasn't. I knew it was very difficult. The attrition rate is incredibly high. Out of 50 people that join, maybe only 8 or 9 will go through. And that just excited me. That excited me that I could test myself.
My good mate was in the army, the Royal Logistics. To quote him, did nothing. He just stood about doing nothing, like operational, did the odd bit of skiing. And we kind of used to joke about it. I wanted to join the army. I failed my medical, actually. Morbidly obese on the scale, 6'9", and I wasn't. I could do about 8 or 9 chin-ups, but I never made it through. But naturally, you always talk around when you're younger. Yeah. I want to join the military. My group of mates did. Aldo, what are the 2 jobs that people want to do in the military, the most desirable ones?
I mean, the ones that I would say that evoke the most sort of young boys wanting to, or young people actually, want to get in, the sexy ones, they would say, is probably sniper and fighter pilot.
There you go. Of course. And you were one of them. Yeah. Because there's joining the military and joining the Royal Marines, or the Army, the Special Forces, and then you level up to specialise as a fighter pilot, fucking cool, or a sniper. They're the 2. So how do you go from being, and I don't want to say a run-of-the-mill Royal Marine, because it's extremely tough to do that. My mates who've been through it, I've said it's absolutely savage, to then level up again. At what age does that process happen? Surely at the age of 16, 17, you're not on this pathway to become a sniper. Surely there's an evolution to get to that point.
You're right. It wasn't at 16. I was on the path to become a sniper from about 12. That's genuine. I knew about that job, and I knew how difficult it was, and I knew I basically spent most of my time reading books about snipers and camouflage and concealment. It's a little bit geeky, but that's why when I'm talking to kids, when I do talks to them, I say you have to be incredibly curated about what you think about, because it oftentimes becomes your reality. So whether you're thinking about it or not, whether you're proactive in what you put into your head or whether you're not, then you'll become what you're thinking about. And if we're not proactive about it, we're thinking about fears and all the stuff that scares us. So we'll see more of that, right? So at the age of 12, 13, I'd made my first ghillie suit. I think I'd watched the film Tom Berenger, Sniper. That's what did it. And so I was kind of on track. That's why I was joining the Marines. It was to do their sniper course. That sniper course is probably the hardest, if not one of the hardest in the world to pass. It's 2 months long. You've got a 2-week selection process to be allowed to get on that after you've done your basic training of 30 odd weeks. So for me, it was what sort of person do you need to become, and what do you need to learn to be able to move? It was kind of quite a simplistic viewpoint back then, but to be able to move through enemy terrain without being seen, living purely by your wits, your skill, and your level. There's no one else to blame. Although I was young and I didn't understand it then, it was an accountability thing. I wanted to be accountable for my success and my failure. I've very rarely, if ever, blame anyone else, even if it's definitely not my issue and out of my control. Then I try and take responsibility for it in a way, because I now know in survival situations, when you take charge of a situation, even though you've got zero control, it gives you that little bit of agency, which allows you mentally to take the next step. You go on a 2-week aptitude, which tests everything, all the basic soldiering, fieldcraft stuff that you would expect a commando to know, and then that's pass or fail. And then you then go on to the sniper training course, which is around about 8 or 10 weeks long now. And it's still, to this day, probably one of the hardest courses that I've ever had to do. And that's it. No one's shouting at you. No one's it's just 8 or 9 blokes being taught how to be the best level of field craft in the world. And it's just self-induced pressure because it's pass or fail. The course runs for 8 weeks or something, and then the last week, regardless of how you've done through the entire course, badge test week, you essentially can fail your entire course from one mistake. So it's very high stress all the way up to the point of completing it.
Yeah. Anything that I've read about you or watched or listened, and again, having spent time with Foxy, you're very different. Looks like he's high energy, like needs it's a bit chaotic, a bit like myself. And I've got mates who are like that, and that serves a purpose in the military. But anything that I've read or looked at you, and the fact I keep saying read, I hardly read. I know that you read, but there feels like there's a real kind of contentness and calmness within you and within your mind. And I imagine that is a fundamental when you're out in the field and having to be patient and calm and content.
It's a confidence in your own abilities or courage in your own convictions, basically. It's taking ownership of your situation, taking ownership of what you're about to do or what you have to do. And knowing that you've got all the pieces to your jigsaw, you're not relying on anyone else to do anything. You can do all of the bits. So I guess, there's many people in the military that are much better level than me at almost everything. At 16, I essentially scraped my way through training just because it's so physically demanding. I mean, your body's being smashed to bits. And then you're thrown into this men's world where you're no longer a boy. You're in the showers with 40 other blokes who are up to the age of 32 at the time. So it's like you're just thrown into this bloke's world right away, and it's a hardcore alpha male world. That's or it certainly was when I joined.
What was the hardest bit about being a sniper?
The hardest part, I mean, it's not, for me, it's not coming, I certainly didn't do lots of it, but it's not coming down to shooting. Shooting's like a tiny part of, as a sniper, your job. There's many reasons why you don't and wouldn't shoot, giving a position away. You're much more effective as passing information. You're an asset, not just to a troop or a company, you're an asset to the unit. So you're much more valuable as eyes and ears, passing information, correct information, not making assumptions and getting facts up and down the chain of command. So I think, the responsibility is a high part of that job. Like I say, getting into a situation where you're as a sniper and you're shooting, like I haven't gone through that. So I think for me it's probably more the responsibility and also the knowledge that you are essentially most of the time your own asset. And so there's a lot that comes with that with regards to all of even just all the minutiae of knowing how to use all your kit, the radios. You might be working in a 2-man team or a 4-man team. So I spent the majority of my time working in a recce troop. So there's just, you'd be in a troop, but you'd be working in a 4-man team. And so you have to know each other person's jobs there. And, you're spread across lots of different technical areas from, rope rigging to, water operations. So I would say the hardest part is, for me, and in hindsight now, is probably that responsibility that comes with it.
Yeah. My mate was in the Falklands and he said it was boredom. And he was there on the hill, on the mountain. He said, just looking at penguins, weeks on end.
Yeah.
And they were changing in brutal conditions.
Yeah. I've spent my life in exactly those situations where you're doing something where life and death is in the balance, whether it's war, climbing a big mountain, submarines, whatever. But 95% of the time is boredom, and it's excruciatingly boring a lot of the time. So like if you're stuck in an OP for 10 days, shitting in a bag and, doing your own food or eating cold food because you can't cook, and you're, if you talk about human performance there, you're wrung out, you're tired, you're scared, you're not getting enough sleep, and also you might be found and killed. So there's a lot going on there, and yet you've still got to be able to do your shift. If you're in a pair, then you're doing an hour on, an hour off, or something like that. It could be for days.
Yeah. Do you not think, and I'm not a psychologist, I'm not here to psychoanalyze anyone, but do you not think with them traits that you had of like patience and being able to be in your own mind and all of these things has set you up for where you are now, because it wasn't as chaotic and you had to have that level of grounding, I suppose, and peace?
Yeah, exactly. I don't get asked back on the jobs that I do now because I'm the best rigger or the best safety guy or whatever. I get asked back because I'm, in my opinion, because I'm calm when the shit hits the fan, and that's what you need. Leadership in the field when it's high stakes, high consequences, requires someone to make decisions effectively based on the information they've got at the time, and also to remain calm through it, because even if you're got a million bits of information coming in at any one time, it really all boils down to, in my experience, your ability to make a well-informed decision, even if you don't have very much information. And that would be based on all of your normal traits, my normal traits that potentially got me into being a sniper. The luck of my biology and my mum and dad's generations all the way back, but then also training at that high level. The more you do in high risk situations, the more you become accustomed to it. Not complacent. Obviously, if you get too far, you get complacent, and then injuries, death, etc., all just round the corner. But it's having that fine balance there, and I think getting out of the denial and deliberation phase when the shit hits the fan. Loads of people think they would do X, Y, and Z. You've heard of fight or flight, but actually the majority of people freeze, and it's just a biological sort of reaction, and that's what the majority of people do. And so, like with training and your own biology that's unique to you, and you kind of get, and more exposure to these things, you become a little bit better at dealing with it. And I think if I was to boil it all down, it probably comes down to making a decision in the moment, because everyone in the shit situation wants to be led. People want told what to do. And that's probably the most effective way of doing it.
And people talk about training, and you've mentioned it being prepared and going through the process. I just wanted to ask about what it takes to get to that level mentally and physically, where I keep saying, I presume it was on a mountain in Afghan, but to get to that point there with all the training, just mentally and physically, is that as fit as you've ever been in that point there, and is that as the most mentally lucid you've been as well?
Yeah, it's, if that's all that I had done, had I been a sniper in the Marines and then left and did a normal job, that would be the sort of pinnacle of my life experience of being in a scary situation. But I think at that point you're well trained, you're very well trained. In fact, you train so much in a certain thing that you're able to do it without thinking about it, and that's the point, right? Train hard, fight easy. Probably the same with rugby drill, so you're not thinking about it. Because when the shit hits the fan, rarely does anyone get any more clever. It's usually the opposite, right? So that part of your brain that's doing, good decision making shuts down, and you revert back to your lowest or your highest level of training. If that makes sense. So whatever your default baseline is, you're going back to that. That's why we train in the Marines. You train at such a high level. You can guarantee that whatever you've planned for won't happen, but you've trained and trained and trained so much that when the thing happens, you then have then got a bit of cognitive capacity to then think outside the box and do something else, make a different decision. So at that point in Iraq, yes, I was at the top of my game, fieldcraft wise, fitness wise. But, in a 7-month deployment, if you look at being out on the ground, you're out in a war zone for 7 months. And so you're not sleeping well, you're not eating well, you're not looking after your exercise or health, really. You're eating shit food, rations. So all of the human performance basics that we take for granted outside of that theatre are gone. That's why Royal Marine Commando training is so difficult, because they can't afford to have someone that breaks in the field because they're not getting 8 hours sleep a night, and they're not getting like the correct nutritional balance, all their macros and micros. And, you need to be, you need to be fit, but you don't need to be elite level athlete fit, because elite level athlete fit will get broken in about a week when you're doing that sort of hard stuff. What you need to be is resilient. You need to have the body and the mind that can grind through not just days or weeks of that toil, but months, sometimes years for some people, with multiple tours. So you can see why ultimately that then has, for someone that's been in the military and they've done multiple tours, why everything else becomes very difficult afterwards, if they're not proactively trying to deal with it.
I think also with that is because you were so elite, and the feeling of, I'm saying it from my perspective, being an athlete or an ex-athlete, and having spoken to people, of being in the zone, that purpose driven, and you're in your prime. You're not thinking, you're in your flow, and then when that gets switched off, and I know this from mates who've been in the military, and I know this being an athlete, and you're chasing that feeling, that state of kind of peace and ease and knowing exactly what you're doing. And
it's a funny one, because that lack of purpose, when you stop becoming like athletes or soldiers, and I'm sure in lots of other walks of life, when that's been your thing, it's not just your job, that's your identity. I was Aldo Kane, Royal Marine Commando sniper, best in the world. That's not me personally, but like the title, right? And then you leave, and then you're none of that. You're essentially, in your brain, if you're not careful about what you're telling yourself, your has-been, that's what you did do, and now who are you? And I now can look back, I'm 47 now, so I now can look back on all of that and see that the times that I was most lost in my life were times when I had no purpose and I didn't have a direction. So essentially, like a ship floating around without a rudder or sails up, and as a metaphor, like you end up in the rocks, and it's kind of true for real life. And so up until 26, when I left, the majority of my life up to that point, I wanted to be a sniper in the Marines, and that's the job that I wanted to do. So then when you leave or you finish or that ends prematurely or for whatever reason, you then have this like lack of purpose, I suppose trying to re-find what that is, and some people never find that again, and that's again another recipe for having a bit of a shit time.
I was chatting to my mate who's very well read, and we were talking about what I thought was a midlife crisis for me, and turns out what I'm searching for is the second mountain. Have you heard this one or not?
No.
Well, you've climbed a few mountains, okay?
Yeah,
so
yeah.
you might be on your 100th, and how many more you want to go, I don't know, but I'm looking for the second one. I had that feeling of being alive, being an athlete, running out there, Champions Cup finals, World Cups, and I didn't realise I was chasing that second mountain until recently, where you're looking for a purpose, you're looking for the thing. Yeah. And what I found as I opened up the conversation and spoke about this more on the podcast and spoke to more guys, a lot of people are looking for that second mountain, because you go through that life of excitement, right? You're looking like, what's next? I want to be a top accountant, or I want to be a pilot, or I want to be a sniper, or I want to be an athlete, I want to be a musician, or whatever it is. And at some point that comes to an organic conclusion. But in our field, because there's an athletic or there's a physical part to that, it naturally comes to an end. And the irony is, at the age of 35 or 34, if you're in my industry, and you as well,
Same,
I think it's a really important thing for me to be talking to people like you and listening and stuff around that.
There's definitely a lot to be said for, as soon as that purpose has gone, it's like when I find myself drifting, I go back to literally take a pen and paper out and write down what it is that actually floats my boat. And I suppose jumping forward from the Marines, I was drifting for quite a few years until I went back to the drawing board, literally, and was like, why did I join the Marines? And it was adventure, travel, expeditions, adventure, that sort of side of things. So I went back to that, and that's how I then repurposed myself, reinvented myself, whatever you want to call it, to then head into this like world that I'm in now. But I would say, like, I've got two young boys, one's 4 and one's 1, so in the thick of it. But for them, when they go to school and they get careers guidance and all the rest of it, I just wonder what they're going to be told about it. And it's, for me, actually sitting down with a pen and paper and working out what it is that your strengths are, what are you good at, not like what are your weaknesses and try and build them up, because that's, you can be on a hiding to nothing trying to build a weakness up, whereas, you're pushing against an open door if you work out what your strengths are. And essentially that's what I did to repurpose myself into like the adventure world and the adventure space.
So it's Aldo Kane, adventurer now. Is that what you see it as? I mean, that again, that's cool. You go from Aldo Kane, Royal Marines, Commando, sniper, and then you're into this adventurer world. And you've done some crazy things. Talk to me about the craziest adventure you've been on. One that sticks out.
I think one that stands out as like quite a pivotal point in my life was rowing across Atlantic with Foxy, Matt, Ollie and Ross. You probably talked to Foxy about it, but we rowed from mainland Europe to mainland South America. None of us had ever done it before. We were all going through actually pretty shit times. The reason I got Foxy on board, or he wanted to come on board, because he had just left the service. He was burnt out and was dealing with his own shit at the time, and we were doing the row anyway. And I'd just been divorced from my my wife, so like all of us had this like stuff going on, and we got in a rowing boat and we did a really difficult thing, and we rowed across the entire Atlantic Ocean to South America. And in that time, yes, there was 10% of it was terrifying and, capsizing and all the rest of it. But what it was just a complete reset. I was just getting into finding out about television and how I could like make some part of that work. I was kind of closing a door on another chapter of my life, which was the Marines, and 5 years jumping around from electricity salesman to working offshore to working in welding fabrication shops and all sorts. So it was kind of closing the door on that, doing a really difficult, scary, physical, mental task, which, like you mentioned, Flo, earlier on, you're rowing for 2 months and none of it's particularly hard in the moment. It's just a grind, and it's a grind physically, mentally. And it was almost like it sort of reset me. It's actually what I needed, because by that point I'd been out the Marines, let's say 10 years or something. Hadn't really found who I was kind of living a bit of a shit life, chasing money instead of chasing a passion. So the motivation was wrong. I was sort of looking for like extrinsic motivation. I was like looking for acceptance from my peers or whatever, and not being sort of true to myself. So I kind of came back from that role like good to go. I was cleansed. It was scary. It was all the right measures of what an adventure should be. We didn't know whether we were going to get there or not until probably the last week. We had no support, no backup. A capsized mid-Atlantic at night is pretty terrifying. Being caught in big storms in a tiny little rowing boat is terrifying. And sharing the cabin with Foxy is even worse.
You know what I'm picking up from this? Out of all the things that you've done, whether it be like the narcoses and the gangsters and the drug lords being in the bottom of a volcano, it actually comes down to two kind of simple things. One is like the emotional psychology of trying to not fix yourself, but get to a place where you're with fellow men, and you're doing it together in a community. And the other one is, which I try and explain to my wife when I'm smashing myself in the gym or on the watt bike or doing hard things, is physically suffering. Yeah. And I think the more stuff that I've looked at now in trying to understand myself, them two things kind of go hand in hand, to find that emotional peace and do that through doing hard shit.
Yeah.
And it's funny that out of all the things that you've done, and mate, I mean, it's fucking savage, right? What you've done. I'm trying to pick out things, but I thought you might have said being next to these psychopaths. Was it in South America with the narcoses? Yeah, who don't understand the value of life yet. You go to the one where you don't necessarily talk about the row. You referenced the boat capsizing, but you actually go deeper into the psychology of actually needing it as a man and doing something that's extremely physically difficult.
Exactly, and that is the important part for me, because I've been in lots of situations where shit's gone wrong, and it was close to a close call, to getting wiped out or whatever. But I took from the row was, I suppose, it's the perfect recipe of how you can build resilience. And lots of people, when I do talks, all the questions are about resilience. How can people be more resilient? How can people deal with all the shit that's going on in the world? And it's not that difficult. Resilience is a moving target. You can be, you can basically be super resilient at work or in shit in a relationship or whatever, fragile. But I guarantee you, if you're going out doing a hard thing, whether it's in the gym and you're doing it with mates, all the recipe, being outside, all of these things are really good for your brain. They're really good for your mental state and your emotional regulation. If you're sat in a tube going to work every day, then sat in front of a computer, then sat in the tube on the way home, and you're not doing exercise, you're not seeing daylight, you're not getting outside, you're not socializing with mates, then it's a recipe for anxiety and depression. It just feeds it. And for me, I'm a physical bloke, so I need that. If I'm not doing that and I'm at home, then my wife is ready to kick me out. So exercise for me, outside for me, doing hard stuff for me is like an emotional regulator. It's the same as laughing or crying. For me, it does the same thing. And so the row was, and I think, a part of it was because we chose to do it. We chose to do it, and it was very difficult. And there's something I find quite interesting about the psychology of that, because we came back from there and I was G'd up, ready for action. I had a little bit of a drop afterwards, which you get on anything where you're pushing yourself that far. A little bit of a mental drop when you're sort of coming off the backside of it. But it's short-lived. I'm confident that I get out of most, I suppose, dark spots because I just go and move my body, or I do things, or I find purpose. But because we chose to do it, no one was telling us to do it. We could have sacked it off at any point. It would have taken weeks to get us rescued, but we kind of burnt our bridges on the shore of Portugal, and we just went at that. We were either going to do it and live, not do it and get rescued, or die in the process.
Why do you think there's so many other normal people, I'm not putting you in the normal category, that are craving something more, like they're wanting to suffer and they're wanting a purpose more than ever? That's what it feels like. I don't know whether that's just my algorithm or that's my network or these are my people.
It's not. It's a massive problem in the world. We're living in probably one of the most volatile, uncertain, complex, ambiguous. You had the term VUCA. VUCA, volatile, uncertain, complex, ambiguous. So we're living in one of these times that's ever been around. If you look at, I'm far from qualified, but this is my opinion. AI, all the computers, we spend all the time on screens. We're so far removed from all the things that make us human beings. And we've got all of this technology doing all of these things for us. We're more connected than ever and more disconnected than ever. And I think that leaves, especially I'm talking about men, because a lot of my life has been hanging around with men from whether it's the Marines or, whatever, doing adventures. And everyone is suffering this. And it's quite a good viewpoint to realise that when you're sat in the tube or you're whatever and there's loads of people around you, everyone's suffering, everyone's finding shit really difficult, but we're not making it any better for ourselves. The stuff that we, COVID was funny because everyone jumps in and they're all doing the Joe Wicks exercises in the morning and they're hanging out with their mates on Zoom and all the rest of it. And, there was this little window into what it was like when people exercised and got outside. And you don't realize what you've got until that's removed. Some people might get all the way through their life and then suddenly have an injury or an illness or whatever, and they realize that all of the stuff that they thought was important isn't. And I feel qualified to say that because I have been in lots of situations where I thought that was it. And so you appreciate things like turning on the tap, getting fresh water, being able to train in the gym, being able to go outside, speaking to your family and friends. And yeah, I've done quite a lot of work over the last 2 years with Professor Andy McCann, who's human performance professor, and sort of trying to get, I've done one of his courses, but trying to get to the bottom of like, how do people operate like me in these environments and have a resilient trajectory coming out the other side of it? Because I've like the Ebola outbreak. I thought I had caught Ebola when I was down there, when we were down there filming, and a few other things like that. And, you know, ultimately you come back and I deal with it the way that I deal with it. And I feel like I'm relatively straight and level. And that comes down to some really basic principles that are not expensive. You know, you look at all the amount of shit out there about biohacking, all the rest of this stuff. Resilience, you know, first of all, most people are resilient. That's the trajectory of human beings. Otherwise, we wouldn't be here. You look at the most horrific things that have happened in the world, and within 1-2 generations, life goes on. So people are generally resilient, and people can be much more resilient by making suffering. I think. I mean, physically, like take yourself out and go to the hills for a day or a weekend with mates. Get wet, get cold. You come back to the office on Monday. You're a bit more resilient. You've got a bit more about you. You may be looking for. You remember Fight Club when they're all sat at the office and they're like, "When's the next one?" And so, like getting together with people, going outside and moving your body. These are all key ingredients to becoming more resilient. It's not about sitting in an ice bath for 15 minutes at -2. You know, I've got one, and I use it because it's hard to get into it. It's not about building resilience. It's just about, it's a hard decision to get in there, right? It's much more about the things that are free, eating well, sleeping well, moving your body, getting outside.
Yeah, there's a real, it's like a sense of, is it aimlessness? It's lost. And I want to chat about kids and stuff like that, you being a father as well, and like how we can change the path that they're on, because this aimlessness that it feels like we're in around social media, around things being a lot easier, food. I mean, I talk about, you go into the garage, you get like, it's shit in whatever you're doing. And just on, to finish this bit off here, I had The Strongest Men, 2 other legendary Scots in the studio, and you listen to Luke talk, and Tom, his brother, who is the world's strongest man, not the men that South African is, but he still is. And they are the same in terms of what they're looking for. They do go cold water. They want to push themselves to the limit all the time. And it's, I just feel as if like this thing around men, this kind of aimlessness, and I think even with youngsters specifically, this theme of the lost boys. I read an article on the BBC and they were talking about young men lacking strong male role models, and that young boys and young men are in crisis. Yeah. That was a quote. It was a BBC, so I don't know how much I believe that. But I do believe it. Yeah. And I look at this and I just think about the responsibility in these things of being a father and working in this testosterone-fueled industry of how you can generate positivity from that. So, and do it in a positive masculinity, which is the buzzword at the minute that has seemed to have been lost. How are you pushing through that as a father, where it's not just about you, it's actually probably more about them and the boys specifically? Yeah,
I mean, there is definitely, from the reading that I've done on it, there's definitely a problem. It's not just for young boys, it's young people. There's a really good book called Anxious Generation by Jonathan Haidt, who puts together a very succinct reason why there's a problem, and it's the introduction of smartphones, social media, and high-speed internet. You know, that based along with the fact that we spend most of our time indoors on screens, not moving, I think he says in his book, you know, like 2006, 7, all the way up to 2008 when that came in. As soon as the tech came in at that level, widespread, accident and emergency visits were basically dropped off a cliff because people weren't going out playing anymore, right? So unsupervised play, climbing trees, doing all that sort of stuff. So, you know, we're making them safer by not allowing them to go out. But then, you know, if you've seen adolescents, then they're plugged into all sorts of weird and wonderful stuff online. But, you know, for me, a lot of what I'm doing for myself at the minute is about who I am for them. So, like, I've spent the last probably 3 years now get my head around emotions, and, you know, because before I would have like 3 or 4: angry, sad, hungry. And, you know, I've definitely been doing a lot of work on that, because that I know that makes someone more resilient in a way that they can regulate like a grown-up, using the parts of your brain that allow you to regulate and separate yourself from a situation and see it for the bigger picture and deal with it in a way that's acceptable. So I've been doing a bit of that, and then just trying to be a role model to them. You know, I'm not sat at home on Instagram and, you know, social media and YouTube and with in one hand, and, you know, we've got an ammo liner, an old sniper ammo liner that's in the house, and when we come in, the phones go in there. We make a point of saying phones in the tub, and it's really about connection, and it goes back to like what makes people happy when they're at end of days. What makes people happy is the fact that they've got friends, family, relationships. It's not the fact that they've got X amount of likes on social media. And, you know, it's a difficult one for me because I get paid by brands. I'm sponsored by a couple of brands, and, you know, so I need to be on there. I need to do stuff on there. But on the other hand, I need to be very careful about when and how I use it. So it's really about being a positive role model and holding my hands up when I make a mistake. I'm like a new dad, 4 years in. Like, I'm making all the mistakes, and but I'm human about it. I'm just saying this is me. I'm working on it.
Yeah, and I think because how old are your 2 boys?
4 and 1.
Yeah, because I feel like now having a 14-year-old boy and an 11-year-old girl, I've got 7-year-old twins, but specifically that age bracket, there's a pushback now around phones, around social media. There's an understanding, there's a desperation from adults and adolescents. I was meant to have, I think it was Jack Thorne who wrote the script for that. He was going to come in the studio. He's being sued for £1 billion now, so he wanted to stand down for a little bit, which was fine, but that had a profound effect on many people. The last scene with Stephen Graham when he's crying into the pillow. As a father, it was fucking frightening. We were on the verge of taking the phone off our 11-year-old daughter, but we took the phone off her. We made radical change, not just because of that. There was a lead up. It wasn't we watched that and we were all scared and we watched it, but we could see changes in our kids. You know, they're starting to bend over. You know, at the head.
That position.
The human question mark.
Yeah.
And we were like, right, well, there needs to be an intervention from us as parents, no one else. Yeah, we can challenge the schools and they need to do this, government needs to do that. But it's at home, isn't it? It's not do as I say, it's do as I do. Do
as I do. Because you can guarantee with kids, man, they're not going to do what you tell them, but they'll definitely 100% do what you do. That's, rightly or wrongly, all the traits that I've got, I've probably picked up off my mum and dad when, in the first 16 years of living with them. But the thing is with it is it's insidious and it's not their fault. And we all bang on about, that generation being incredibly fragile. And that is a product of having everything when you want it now. And they get it on the phone, right? We all do. Like, if I have to wait more than 2 days for something to get delivered, I'm like, what's going on here? So we've all, it's been insidious. We've all been drawn into this now. And I think it's the same when any tech comes in, is then the pendulum swings really far one way and then needs to come back. But I have heard there's quite a lot of pushback from it. And we try to be outside as much as possible. And it's not about spending money. It's not about doing any of that, because the kids don't want all the things that we want to give them. What they want to do is go out in the forest and build a den. That's what I did when I was a kid. And they want to climb a tree. He wants to jump from like that rock to that rock, which has got a 50% chance he's going to smash his face, but he wants to do it. So it's about, like, for me, it's about giving them that opportunity to then be involved in risky play, unsupervised to a certain degree, because that's where you learn to interact. That's where you learn to, like, social interaction and how to have a conversation and how to move, proprioception. How do you move your body through a thing? Because you don't want to be caught with your pants down when the shit hits the fan somewhere and, like, you can't run, you're obese, you're whatever, you've got all your tendons are loose from never having done any exercise in your life. Like, these are all basics. And for my boys, I don't ram anything down the throat, but outside, exercising and dealing with their emotions, crying, laughing, whatever.
Isn't it funny now? And I had this conversation with the wife where I keep mentioning suffering. She's like, I'm watching loads of campaign stuff, so that we're talking about suffering and wanting to suffer. But with the kids, she's rocking up to school for school pickup, okay, with a snack, with a full water bottle. Before they were sleeping with white noise, all of these things, right? And I grew up with absolutely nothing, holes in my shoes. I don't think I drank water for maybe a month. I went without. I maybe had some fruit juice or whatever, and grew up on beans on toast. Yeah. I mean, the guts are wrecked now, but now it's snack, water bottle, like everything. Like, it's not just like socially on tap, but as parents. And me and the wife now, and she won't mind me saying this because we openly talk about it and we think it's important to talk about it. We've got 4 children, so we're well placed to talk about it. And I say about, not suffering's the wrong word, but making things more difficult. Yeah. If they're going outside, she's like, she isn't. Other people say they need a jacket because they'll get sick. I was like, they won't get sick. Yeah. You only get sick if
they get better.
There you go. Yeah. Let them.
There's a thing that, what was it? It's and these are all things that you can work on little by little. And like the suffering is just a word that everyone doesn't like because they're like, it's very masculine, or you want to make people suffer. It's really just about doing the hard things. It's get up in the morning and do the hardest thing that you've got to do that day. Do it. What is it? Write a really difficult email or do the thing. Do the gym, do the walk, whatever it is. Because in 10 years' time, you're going to wish you started 10 years ago.
I wanted to ask, as we come to an end here, about what was the one moment in your time in the Marines or the adventure that has kind of changed the way that you see life forever?
I think, like, in the adventure world, you see lots of stuff that humbles you and brings you back to, the basics of life. Like being in a volcano when it erupts, that's pretty tricky and scary. But I think the thing that has stuck with me a lot more than anything else was being down filming the Ebola outbreak down in Sierra Leone and Liberia in 2014, just to see the pure disruption to human life. I was down there for 3 months and see the amount of death and destruction and, political parties weighing in and, misinformation, and just to see and the people suffering in the moment. So I think that was probably one of the trickiest ones, but also, one of the most amazing sort of demonstrations of human resilience and, people surviving it and getting through it and out the other side and trying to restart their lives and get on with it. So I think that was probably up there. But adventure-wise, being inside a volcano when it's like erupting is scary.
If someone reached out to you at a high level, whatever that means, if you can call politics high level, and you have a voice already in the media and everything that you're doing, if there was a change or a couple of changes that you could make for our country, for the younger generation coming through, what do you think it would be? Like, I've got mine. So as you're thinking, I would change the way that schools are done. This kind of archaic approach of like maths, English, science, you need to sit in a classroom and that's what you'll be judged and ultimately valued on for the most important years of your developmental life. As, let's use the boys specifically, but the girls also, but the boys, that's where I see the most kind of pushback innately around them. So that's what I would do. Do you have anything that you sit on and you'd be like, if I had the keys to the kingdom, I would do this?
I would... Yeah, I get, like, because my background is outdoors. And I know that, I've been through lots of potentially traumatic incidents, and I'm super well balanced, I think, because of that, and grown from it. Post-traumatic growth is what you would call it. I would say that all that human resilience starts when they're in school. So the Scandies do it well, getting them outside, and lessons outside and being outside. So I think, first of all, I'd bin phones from all schools. I get loads of people saying, you can't do that, you've got to do this, you've got to do that. The facts are out there. Those things there are undermining absolutely everything about what it means to be a young person and a normal person at our age. So I would bin them. The science is clear that anyone that uses a phone a lot while they're going through that puberty and sensitive period permanently rewires their brain. So I would personally say no phones in school. There's plenty of other ways to keep people safe. And I'd also make risky outside play. Again, I remember when I was a kid, there used to be adventure play parks everywhere. And then they all got ripped up, growing up in the west coast of Scotland. They all got ripped up and taken out because people were hanging about under them doing drugs or whatever. But those play parks are so important for kids to learn about their body and proprioception and exercise and how to move their body through space and time. So that would be it. It wouldn't be much. It would be more play, and certainly more play in school. They need to be playing in school all the way up to whenever they leave. We should be doing more play as adults and bin the phones.
And what's next? You've filmed this documentary with the great Steve Backshaw.
Yeah.
How was he, by the way?
Yeah,
he's a rugby fan.
He is, well. Yeah. He's Steve actually, love Steve. He basically gave me a big opportunity and asked me to come and be his sort of safety sidekick on, I think, we've done like 14 or 15 expeditions together, all world first or up there sort of trips. So that actually, we filmed that in 2018-19, and that was all just rerun on the BBC recently. But I've just finished doing a big series for Apple TV that comes out. It's called The Wild Ones, and that comes out in July the 11th. And then Foxy and I and Woody and Carl just did a 500k Arctic ultra race up in Sweden, which was genuinely one of the hardest things I've ever done. I remember saying on it to Foxy that doing that in the moment was harder than climbing Everest and Lhotse back to back. It's just horrendous.
And is that documented?
Yeah, so it's filmed. It'll be on Channel 4 at some point. So I would imagine we're aiming for a mental health window, because it's not really about the Arctic or doing a race. It's about what we've talked about. It's about 4 blokes who've all gone through the ringer, that are putting themselves voluntarily through the ringer again, to get back to basics, to get back to that feeling of being outside. So it's about male mental health under the lens of doing a ridiculous challenge.
Yeah, that's so cool, Aldo. And your book, Lessons from the Edge, do you still stand by that? Because I know as life evolves and your experiences and your thought process and being a father, sometimes things can change. Do you still rely on that as your kind of Bible and way of life?
I do. I had to miss so much out of it, which really I sort of, there was just too much to go into a book, and like blokes like us, probably don't sit down and read a big thick volume, so it was heavily edited. But I'm in the process of getting a book 2 together, which will be much more specific in it. What my plan is to be a blueprint for the younger generation. Everything from how to actually work out what your purpose is and how motivation works, all the way through to getting outside and exploring and doing hard shit.
Yeah, Aldo Kane, it was amazing to have you. You know the drill, because you've got stories for days. We could do this again and again and again, so I really appreciate your time.
Thank you, mate. Appreciate that.
That's cool. Thank you, everyone, for listening to The Big Jim Show. What a cool conversation. Aldo Kane, what a dude. Could have done 4 hours with him. Definitely get him back. But his story from joining the Marines as a 16-year-old man to the stuff that he's doing now as a father, and all the positive stuff he's doing around his own mental health and putting his story out there, was incredibly cool. If you want to watch us on YouTube, make sure you subscribe. Otherwise, follow us on all your favourite podcast platforms. And I'll see you next time. Be cool.